I want to welcome everyone to this semester's inaugural Going Far with an English Major conversation. And we try to do these at least once a semester. It's an opportunity for us to hear about the great work that alumni of our English program are doing, as well as to hear about the variety of career paths that an English major can prepare you for. And so we're always grateful to our alumni for talking to us about their career journeys and the skills that they have developed. Tonight's interview is with Kate Blair of Brightside Child and Family Advocacy, and Dr. Kendra Parker is going to handle the interview portion of the evening. But thank you for being with us, and let's hear about going far with an English major.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here to conduct this interview today. Let's just get started. So, Kate Blair joined Brightside Child and Family Advocacy, previously Savannah Casa, as the executive director in 2018. And during her time with Brightside, the organization has added 17 staff members, 200 CASA volunteers, and the Bright House, which is a supervised visitation and family support center. So by remaining laser focused on fundraising, community engagement, and growth, Brightside's team has achieved its ambitious goal of serving 100% of children in foster care and program expansion. So before joining, Kate served as the Director of Development and Communications with Step Up Savannah. Her past professional and volunteer experience includes communications, corporate foundations, nonprofit leadership, board development, and fundraising. She's done a lot. So Kate has her BA in professional communications. She is the graduate of Leadership Savannah and a board member of Migrant Equity Southeast and Tharos Place. She and her husband, Andy, are the proud parents of two incredible teen boys, Tech and Ferdowek. And when Kate is not out shaking the money trees, she is typically found with a wine glass in hand while planning the next party or vacation. And so if we could give a round of a virtual applause to Kate to welcome her here today, show of hands or fingers. Kate has opted not for a presentation. She said she wants to do something so much more informal, and I 10 out of 10 respect all of that. And so first, Kate, if you could you just tell us about your current position?
Sure. So, as you said, I'm the executive director of Brightside Child and Family Advocacy, which we work primarily with children in foster care. I've been in this role just around 6 years. It'll be 6 years in December. And I love it. I love the work that we do. I love doing work that I'm passionate about, first of all. Second of all, I love fundraising and grant writing and just getting out and telling people about the awesome work we do. So it really aligns with my passions and I think my skill set. There's obviously parts of executive director ship that aren't my skill set, like the budgeting and all the money stuff that you have to learn on, and the managing of people. Those are all the things you learn when you get into the role. But yeah, but otherwise it really has been a fantastic.
No, that's so good. And I think the burning question on everybody's mind is, how did your English degree help you prepare? Because you said fundraising money, and I'm like, please tell me. So yeah, how did your English degree help you prepare for this position?
Yeah, I actually really feel that an English major is ideal for going into any form of nonprofit leadership or fundraising. Um, when I hire directors of development or people in that position, that's honestly what I'm looking for. Maybe I'm a little biased because I'm an English major, um, but writing is a huge part of nonprofit, right? And so grant writing, we are an organization, and most organizations are heavily grant funded. Grants are they're a lot of work to get, but they're much more sustainable funding and more controllable, in my opinion. And so for me, when I was in school at what was Armstrong, now Georgia Southern, I took a grant writing course, was actually with Dr. Merziak. Am I pronouncing her name right? Yes.
Mhm.
And so a couple of my professors are still there. So and great professors. Anyway, in her class, I actually wrote my very first grant as part of that class. And I was a little bit older going back to school, and so I was already had a child, and I was connected with his charter school. So a charter school that was launching, a friend that was helping launch it. So I wrote the grant for that charter school and brought in around $250,000 on my very first grant.
Wow.
That ignited my passion for grant writing. One, that kind of win, you can't like that, such a high to get that kind of win. It still doesn't get old. And it just made me see how well my love of writing aligns with my passion for doing meaningful work. And so after I graduated, that's immediately what I looked for was a development position with looking for organizations that had a heavy emphasis on grant writing. So Step Up Savannah was pretty much where I started my most of my nonprofit experience. And that's a primarily grant funded organization, very little other kinds of giving. So I was able to do that. And it was also a communications role. So it was development and communications. So what I loved so much, if you're not familiar with Step Up Savannah, it's an organization that works with low income families and helps find pathways to higher economic mobility. And so I got to meet a lot of people that had very different experiences from my own, and learn about the systems that keep the poor, right? And so learning all about that, and then my role was to take that information and dispense it to the community in a way that will, one, make them act, right? Make them vote differently, make them advocate with the legislator, make them donate, make them volunteer. And so that was where I really got to hone some of my skill set of communications and telling the story of the organization. And I had a fantastic executive director there when I started. She's actually doesn't live in Savannah anymore, but she was a journalism major, and she wrote before she went into nonprofit, so very similar to my own. So she became a wonderful mentor, ripped my writing to shreds, like any good editor would do, and made me an even better writer, even more than Dr. Mendenhall ripped apart my writing. But so she was really fantastic in teaching me how to write for nonprofits and just to expand on that. And I think that's so important, finding a mentor. And so lucky to find someone who also was an English major and had a passion for writing. And so in that role, I really got to expand that and then dabble in learning how to solicit individual donations and how to get out there and convince individuals to give to your organization. And so that's pretty much how the English major came in handy. And I mean, I still now with an organization, when I started at this organization, we were around $400,000 in revenue a year. We're now at like 1.8. As you mentioned, we've grown like significantly, but I still do all the grant writing, and I really struggle to give that piece away because I love it so much. And again, that high, I just got a grant the other day. I wasn't expecting that was $100,000. I was like, yes, and that feeling is so awesome. And that you have that control, right? Like it's your compelling story that you get to write and convince people to give and make a difference with those dollars.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I know I have questions, but I cannot wait for the people in the audience to have questions because you've just said so much stuff. And I think too, like the money piece, it's not always about the money, but it is like that nice high to get $250,000 on your first one. That's a big deal. And so it's really interesting that you say that because there's a lot of media experience or media stuff out here talking about the death of the humanities. And like there's only this need for higher education to work on job preparation. But given what you said about you love to do the grant writing, you don't want to give that piece away. How would you respond to that? Like, there's no need for a humanities degree. What's the point of an English degree? What do we need higher education for? Like, would you have, I mean, do you think you would have been better off with a more narrow preparation for a particular field? Or I mean, I think you said some of this, but it seems like your humanities degree has served you very well.
Absolutely. And I think it does, and we need it. I mean, one, I don't think I would have landed in doing a job I love if not for it. I think because it has a broad spectrum of jobs that you can move into. And I still, as someone that employs people regularly, the way they write is so important. So even
Mm,
though I primarily hire social workers because we work in child welfare, I feel like I often say that it's such an absence. There's not strong writing, and every day they have to write emails, they have to write reports that they give to judges and attorneys, which many attorneys are English majors, right? And so there's that kind of lack of depth when it comes to their ability to write. And I honestly think I wrote my organization into the place that it is today.
mm,
With any other degree, I don't know how that I would have gotten that. I considered doing social work when I went to school, but then it's like I started doing English classes. I mean, obviously, I loved to read and write growing up, and that and one of the professors was like, "You really should consider an English degree," and I was like, "I didn't even think about it," and we kind of talked through what that might allow for me, and I have taken I've previously in my position had been people with different degrees and different experience, much more programmatic experience, social work experience. And while the work that the organization did was incredibly important and very yeah, just very, I mean, obviously that programmatic piece is so important. There was not much growth in the organization because there needed to be someone that could tell the organization's story. And so that is what changed the trajectory of the organization's path, was because I was able to get out there and tell that story. And no one can tell a story like an English major. And so I think that's why we need that. And so and I think it's also important that we all know what our strengths are. And so for me, that was my strength. And so what did I do? I hired people that were really good at that programmatic piece, who could do the work, who could tell me what they were doing, and I can take that. And an example of how I try to stay very close to our mission, even though I rarely get to even interact with children in foster care, occasionally when they're maybe in the office and things of that nature, is when my program director, when a child comes into foster care, you get we get an email that says this child's coming in, and it tells why that child came into care, right? And so I make sure my program director forwards every single one of those, so I see why every child in Chatham County comes into foster care, and I take those, and those are the stories that I use when I go out and tell, because these kids are otherwise invisible, right?
mhm,
If there wasn't someone in our organization that was focused on the storytelling, then no one in our community would know about the children that are our community's children. And so, so again, I think that only comes from a more broad background and not a specific, that's not what my staff learned to do, but that is absolutely what I learned to do. I learned how to write press releases and write grants and tell stories, and also take stories and tell people about those stories, so I don't know. I might have dragged on a bit, but I'm very passionate about it.
Oh, no, no, that's not dragging on at all because, oh my goodness. I mean, there's the money piece too, but like you said, you're helping give a voice to those who have been silenced or who those we don't typically want to hear from, and children, So no, that's a really big deal. Um, yeah, thank you so much for that. So we've got some college students here in the audience, and so what would advice would you give to college students or English majors or both for maximizing their time in school? Because it sounds like you did that very well. So, do you have any advice for them on that front?
Yeah, I think use those internships and use it well,
Mm,
right? Be proactive about that. I personally, every time I have a intern, like if it's a good intern, they leave with already like I write them a recommendation that they can keep on file. But I still 5 years, I just gave another recommendation for someone that I had 5 years ago because they were such a fantastic intern. We right now have an intern from Georgia Southern, and she's been helping us in development. She just told me today, I hope I don't tell her story for her, but that she was not really that interested in development as much, and doing so fundraising, right? That aspect. And she's been surprised how much she enjoys it. Now she's applying for development positions and asked me if I could be a reference. So she's fantastic. So I was like, absolutely. But
mm,
you wouldn't know, like I didn't think while I was when I went to school that I wanted to go into be in development into fundraising, right? I thought I wanted to do more programmatic work, and I knew I wanted to do something in nonprofit. I wanted, or at least something meaningful. I was working in insurance before that, and that was not doing it for me.
Okay.
Wanted to do something that was a little more meaningful. And so, at least meaningful to me, that's very important work. I really love my insurance people. And until I did those internships, I wrote those grants, I didn't realize what my place could be. And
Mm,
that really, and I mean, and it shows like how quickly I was able to move into even an executive director role. So I left college, was in development for 5 years, and then I became an executive director. And so it was relatively quickly to be able to move up in up an organizational ladder because of my ability to fundraise. And I remember interviewing for this position, and I found out, as we all try to do, who are, especially in Savannah, we can do it, who our competition is. And I was like, oh, shoot, I have development experience, but they're like previous executive directors. They've been in this field for 15 years. And or like one was like 20 plus years. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to get that position. But I had such a strong fundraising background and my ability to articulate what importance of grant writing and funder development that I was able to secure a position that I probably shouldn't have been able to and have been able to thrive in it. So I would
look at that.
yeah, I would just be hungry, right? Like be hungry. There's so much you can learn. I think um, what I also enjoyed when I was pursuing my degree was to just try a little bit of everything, right? Like I did want to really just sit around and read Jane Austen all day. That's really honestly why I initially even did the English degree. What? I could just sit around and read novels,
Yeah.
right? But then just really learning more about professional communications and social media and marketing and different aspects of writing that really kind of expanded my worldview. And yeah.
Okay. So what I hear you saying is that be curious, be open, and be flexible. And so those served you well as a student. Would you say that these are some of the same qualities that make an effective leader? Because you're a leader, you deal with leaders a lot, and not just leaders, but also potential employees. So are those some of the qualities that you look for when you are like targeting leaders, trying to talk to them, and also hiring people to come work for you?
Yes. Yes, I think so. I would add to it empathy. And I honestly think that is something that an English major actually helps you to develop because you spend so much time reading the stories of others. And you like we just kind of naturally put ourselves in because of the amount of things we read and write, we put ourselves into the to the shoes of someone else. And for me, hiring and being an employer, being a leader, empathy is probably top of the list. And so, because I can't be a good leader and a good manager if I don't care deeply about my employees and empathize and try to understand what they're going through or the clients that we serve, right? Um, and just as a colleague as well. So I think I would add just empathy, but as just like doing the work, uh, yes, someone that is, if you choose nonprofit, you have to be thick-skinned. Because as much as I love to say I liked the wins, I've gotten a lot of no's too, right? Like you have to lean into that too. And so I would say but you have to be able to um adapt quickly in nonprofit that year to year. I mean, when you're in fundraising and as a nonprofit leader, you are hustling for money nonstop. And so like it just doesn't stop. I mean, some of us I get together with other executive director friends and we're just like, wow, this is going to be a year. Like, we're just going to have to hit the pavement that much harder. And so you have to be passionate about what you're doing or you're not going to keep going. So finding that thing that you're passionate about, adapting, being quick to, but I think any boss would tell you someone that's proactive. I do not work well. People that do not last long in my organization are those that are waiting for me to tell them what to do. Um,
Okay.
it's those that are incredibly proactive and are finding ways to adapt and to um, and to do, because I don't want to be micromanaged, and I don't want to micromanage anyone else. So if you can out of the gate really display that you have that and a curiosity to do more and to learn more and to be more, I think you'd be wonderful and fine.
Okay, so be proactive, adapt, be
Mhm.
curious, be proactive. Like repeat, be proactive. No, that's excellent. That's excellent. And so you've also talked about some networking. But can you talk about how you did your own networking? You mentioned a couple of professors. So how did you get into the internships that you got? Could you talk about networking and what some people might do in order to sort of navigate that world?
Sure. So I was a non-traditional student, so I was a little bit older, and I had already been a little like embedded into the community. So it did help me a little bit. Like I already knew, for me, my internships, I already knew someone starting a school. So I was kind of fortunate that way.
Mhm.
And I was already working with coastal children's advocacy some, but I will tell you that the interns that find us, I know working with your professors and asking them, I proactively like reached out to professors at Georgia Southern because I wanted students from the English department. We get a lot of students from social work and child and family development, right, to do the programmatic work, but I reached out to professors and were like, can I get some good English majors who want to like learn this side of things? So that's how I've how some level of that. I don't know if anybody's familiar with AmeriCorps. We always have an AmeriCorps Vista, and Step Up Savannah manages the AmeriCorps Vista program, which if you're not familiar with it, it's similar to Peace Corps, but but it's in the United States. And so that is a really good way to get involved with nonprofits. If after you graduate, you're just like, I'm not ready to get a job, or I want to do something, you can do AmeriCorps. It's not high pay, but you do get money towards your student loans and things of that nature. But I bring that up because they also, a little lesser known, they also do summer AmeriCorps Vistas. And so that's a 2 month during the summer that you work with an organization that is working in somewhere, something to do with poverty, and you for 2 months. So it's kind of like a paid internship in that way, that you're making something, you're getting something towards student loans. And I find that to be a really good option, because while you're there, you also get to engage with a whole bunch of other nonprofits. So you're learning so much. You get to know this nonprofit, but you get to know other nonprofits. They usually convene the AmeriCorps Vistas in the summer, and so that they can get to know one another, and then you get to go know a lot of other nonprofits. But if you're interested in nonprofit, just start going to nonprofit events. We have them all the time, right? Event fundraising is another part of our life in nonprofit. So if you're interested in nonprofit, just start showing up to the fundraisers. Some are just free to show up to, right? Go to Starland when they're having a nonprofit night, and just different
Okay.
things like that. And introduce yourself. I mean, that is so impressive to me when interns go out of their way. And they have to, like, I'm busy, right? I have 20 staff that have a million things. I have children, I have a lot going on. So when I have an intern that like steps into my office and is like, hey, Kate, can I have 15 minutes? I respect that. I love that. As
Right.
to the ones that are just like, oh, she just seems too busy. I don't want to, I want to talk about you. You're just not like, I just don't think about it. And so you've got to push yourself into my space. And I think that is a fantastic way to network. And ask, if you're interning with someone, ask them to introduce you to so whatever field you're in. But for in my case, nonprofit, we all know each other. And so if you work in our field, and you say, you know what, Kate, like I've really enjoyed interning with you, but I'm really interested in working with animals. Well, I know all the EDs that work with animals, so let me introduce you to them. And so we all know Savannah's a small community in that way. Statesboro, I'm sure, is very much that way as well. And so taking advantage of that, of having these perfect sized towns, right? That we have the ability to network and connect with people much easier than maybe if you're in Atlanta or something like that.
And I like that, the idea that it's okay to say, hey, can I talk to you real quick? I think that's a really good skill to develop. And also the idea that y'all are all connected. So it's also really important to maintain professionalism. So I'm curious about what professionalism looks like to you in the field that you work in. And because I know it's different for every sort of sector. So what does that mean for you?
That's a great question. I I take a probably different approach to what I consider professionalism. So I apologize in advance to other people that maybe have very different standards. Um, I believe for us in our organization, what professionalism looks like is it's about the way we talk about the families we serve. And so we talk about them with dignity, we don't make assumptions, and we always operate from a space of assuming positive intent. And so the stories we tell about our families or about one another is not this person's a jerk or this person is a horrible parent or this person is rather that I wonder what's going on in this person's life. This has nothing to do with me, and we just approach it differently. That's what professionalism means to me. We are very relaxed here. Unless you're going, we do have to go to court hearings often, juvenile court, and then we dress professionally, or is what one would claim is what professional attire is. But otherwise, we're very laid back here in the office. And so so I really try to focus more on the way we operate rather than the way we necessarily present ourselves. And from colleague to colleague, if you're assuming positive intent about your colleague, you can enter a conversation much better. And I always say you bring your whole self to work. I think I just say that because I really like to cuss and I don't want anybody to tell me not to. And that's my whole self. Um, but I joke, but we work in a really tough field. And so we want people to come to here with this is your whole self. You bring who you are. But we do it in a way that doesn't make anyone else feel less safe. And we are caring of one another. And we, again, assume that positive intent. Now, if we talk about going to the juvenile court, what they're looking for, right, when you go to court or you go into some of those other spaces, is that you dress appropriately and however they determine appropriate dress, and that your emails should be more formal. The way you address a judge is much more formal. And so those are things we have to learn and we develop and we teach our staff as we go. But I think professionalism to me, it means treating others with kindness. And then I think everything else kind of flows from there.
No, and I love that answer, which is it's why I asked, because I think professionalism does mean different things to different people. It's not always about what you're looking like, but I love this, approach people with kindness and empathy. I think that's a really good way because the interpersonal relationship matters. You're working with people, and so it doesn't matter if you're dressed in a business suit if you're very nasty.
Right. And I think coming from that too is like treating people with kindness. That means when there's a big meeting that everybody's showing up for, you're showing up on time because that's showing kindness to other people, right? And that's my big rule is that you show up to big staff meetings on time because there's 20 of us. When it's one-on-one with each other, if you're running late, that's fine. Just text me, right? But it's showing kindness. It's being another part of that to me about where it shows up, showing kindness is everything goes on your calendar so that people know where you are and people can plan around you. That is being kind to one another and not expecting them to have to reach out to you 7 times to figure out a time to meet or your supervisor to have to worry about where you are. So treating each other as professionals, knowing that you're doing your job. I don't have to see you. I know and trust that you're doing your job, but that you're also considering how the organization operates as a whole and how what you do impacts your colleagues.
Absolutely. I love that calendar sharing. Not for us here because, but I love that idea. That's really, really important. And I only have, I think, 2 more questions and then we can open it up. But yeah, I know you do a lot of community service. And so does it ever get overwhelming? And when it does, I guess I can combine the two. When it does, what do you do to achieve like a work-life balance outside of the community service that you do? So what are like, how do you balance when it gets too overwhelming? How do you sort of decompress, disconnect, and then recharge?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it does get overwhelming. I think for me as a leader, it gets overwhelming when everybody's paycheck is dependent on you. Like you got to figure out a way. That's exhausting. Like the weight of that is heavy for me. I think for my team, I think they deal with much more difficult things when they're sitting in court and attending or working directly with families, and they are exposed, right? They have secondary trauma, right? They're around everybody else's trauma, and that is impacting them. And so we talk about wellness a lot in our organization. We work very closely, and we're actually in the DFACS building. So if those aren't familiar, it's Department of Family and Children's Services. That's the child welfare system, right? And there is incredibly high turnover in this work for a reason, right? Like it is hard work working and seeing the worst of the worst, the things nobody else wants to talk about or see. Also, it's very underfunded. And so everybody has very high caseloads. So we are very purposeful as an organization to address those things so that we don't have that high level of turnover. Um, and I think it's something also younger generations are just much better about talking about this stuff, like talking about what we need to be well, what we need for work-life balance, what we need, right? So we talk openly and often about therapy. We all are big proponents of therapy, and we encourage that, and working really hard to get some funding to even support that for my staff. For myself, as you read in my bio, I like to have a glass of wine and plan parties. That's kind of my, um, which usually just ends up later being more work for me, but in the moment, it's a lot of fun.
Fun. Yeah.
And so for me, spending time with friends, I go on a couple girls' trips a year just to like hang out with my friends, and I really enjoy traveling. Um, Getting together with people with similar jobs is really helpful for me. So there's a group of executive directors that meet pretty regularly, and we go and talk. One, we can talk about our own HR issues or the things that we can't talk about, right? Being a leader can be very lonely. And so finding people that you can communicate with and who understand where you're coming from. My husband's a hype guy. Like anything I come, like if I'm like, oh, story with this person, he's like, oh, you have every right to be fire him. So he is not a good person for that. I cannot ask for his. I need my girlfriends my friends that are executive directors to be like, here's what I did. Why don't you try this, and have these kinds of conversations? So that helps. One thing that I think more organizations should do, and I just got my board to approve, so I'm very excited, is we offer sabbaticals for those that have worked in this work for at least five. So between your 5 to 7 year mark, you can take up to a 3 month sabbatical that's paid. And so that's an opportunity that, if someone had a baby, we'd figure out how to cover that role. So why don't we prioritize in that way? And so I'm very excited about being able to offer more space for that. But I will say I've noticed a flip side to all of this post-COVID is that we all were doing so much, and we saw this with our volunteers, right? Everybody, like we're all doing so much. It was so easy for us to recruit volunteers. COVID hit, and everybody's so good at saying no now.
Yeah.
Which has really impacted our ability to recruit volunteers. It's really good, right? Like America should have learned how to say no a long time ago. This is like a difficult thing that we have, but it feels like it's leaning almost sometimes so much to the other extreme. And as a leader and as a volunteer recruitment organization, we've gotten to this point that how do we balance that but still get the work done? And I think that's always going to be, every parent struggles with that too, right? How do you balance your workload and your children? And every time you have more responsibilities, it's figuring out a way to balance it all. And so but I do think self-care is incredibly important. And I think the only way you can be good at self-control, at self-care, is by being around people that also prioritize it and working within an organization. So I encourage you, when you interview for jobs, ask those questions. What does work-life balance look like to this organization? What does self-care look like to this organization? Because if you're working for an organization that expects you to be on the phone 24/7, you're going to burn out really quick.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's move into questions from the audience. I will say that we are recording, so if you don't want to be on camera, that's fine. But if you do, feel free to turn on your camera and we'll pin you. But any questions that you have for Kate?
Oh, I see one of my former professors on there.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. So if you want to, you can unmute or you can raise your virtual hand, either one. William Daughtry, do you want to be on camera?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay, go ahead.
So I struggle a lot with motivation, like getting stuff started, or once I have started it, I like take a break, and then once I do that, I can never get back into it. So how do you deal with just pushing through that like grog of trying of that grog, you know?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I struggle with that a lot. I'm really good at starting things. My really honest answer to that, if I'm being really honest, is become a leader of an organization and hire people to do the parts you don't like. Like, that is what you get to do, right? When the higher you move up in an organization, the more power you have to delegate the tasks that may not be your strengths. But I still have to do a lot of things that I really don't enjoy, and I struggle with that. Um, I would say I've really leaned into like AI with task. So utilizing like AI tasks, online task things where you can make your to-do list and they will block out your calendar for you. And so it becomes a little bit of a game for me to like beat it before it says I should have got that task done. I'm very competitive, so that helps me. So that's been a task. A way that I've managed that. But honestly, I don't know that that's something I've really mastered. I put all those things I don't want to finish to the end, and then when they're due, I am here till midnight getting them done, like it's just so I wish I had a little bit better of an answer for you.
That's fine. It's better than what I had. I didn't have anything, so that definitely gives me motivation to become a CEO or something.
There you go. That's right.
Thank you, William. Kara, do you mind being on camera?
Yes, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
So I was kind of wondering what your advice would be. I am in my senior year, and so I have a really pretty strict like classes I have to take before I graduate in May. I haven't gotten the opportunity to take any like grant writing classes, but I'm hoping the career that I'm hoping to pursue would involve quite an extensive grant writing. What advice would you give to someone who isn't really experienced with grant writing yet? I might take a few classes once I'm in my graduate program, but I'm not sure how that'll look like. So, are there any like resources you would recommend to kind of see like an outline for what a grant proposal might look like?
So I think a lot of people would disagree with about what I'm about to say, but I don't think there's anything that magical about grant writing. I think people make it a much more magical thing than it is. I think if you're a strong writer, you will figure it out. And so I think you can absolutely go to some classes. I mean, it was beneficial to go to one class and kind of understand the structure of grant writing and such. But I think like everybody think it's this like magical unicorn. It's one of those things that if you're a good writer and you just believe that you can do it, you will do it. Like it's not anything different than all the kind of writings you do for all of your other classes. You're writing a compelling case about something. There are some free classes that get offered in our community all the time. And if you email me and I can put my email in it, I can connect you. I think there's actually a grant writing. The United Way is doing a free grant writing, and the city of Savannah does it, which they are free and open to the public that you can take some classes so you can kind of learn about the structuring. The budgeting aspect are a little bit different then, so that would be where I would maybe spend a little bit of my time. But really just volunteer with an organization and start writing. I typically with my interns, I'll give them some of the corporate grants to just get started on because those are pretty easy in that like you just write the compelling case. And if you volunteer with an organization or intern with an organization, at least at my organization, you just get access to my shared drive. You can go and read all of my past grants, and just by reading those, you learn. Honestly, at this point, again, I've kind of leaned into AI, and maybe I shouldn't say this as an English major, but it learns my style of writing. I take my old grants, I put it in, and it makes it like just freshes it up, and I use it again. And so it saved me a lot of time. But I would really encourage, I'd really encourage just do it. Just try, give it a try. If you could even find some that are from say your clubs at school, but you're going to go and get your master's, you said?
I am hoping right now I'm in the process of applying to master's programs. My goal is to get a master's in higher education administration. My minor right now is human development and family science.
Okay.
So my final goal is like I know Georgia Southern has our child development center on campus. I know like several other universities do that. So my like overarching career goal would be to work at a center like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, just give it a try. You can just, yeah. And like, if that's what you're interested in, I would even encourage you, if you're going to get your master's, go find some organizations that are similar to and go work, volunteer or intern at some of those so you can see what it's like and make sure it's what you want to do. But yeah, no, I think if you're a good writer, you can write a grant. It's strong writers. It's those that aren't strong writers that really struggle with grant writing.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And like I said earlier, find someone like I found that like ripped my writing to shreds. That also will help you become a better grant writer.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Other questions?
I'll ask a question.
There we go. Yes.
So Kate, you're so amazing. I know we're gonna mine this whole interview for some of these sound bites you've given us, selling the English major. So when you see a commercial with you in it selling our English degree, just be aware.
Look better then.
No, it's just so good. So much good advice. And I'm so proud of everything you've done. I just think it's incredible. And everywhere I go, people talk about all the important work you're doing. So I'm going to ask you though about a question about walking into the room the first time. Like, talk about imposter syndrome a little bit for us, because I know, part of what's going on sometimes with students is putting themselves out there. So can you talk about, have you had experience with imposter syndrome and kind of some of the strategies you use to overcome that, to step in the door?
Yeah, I mean, I still struggle with that, right? I think it's tough. I think for me, you know, I just have, let me see. I want to be thoughtful about my answer to this. So, I still experience imposter syndrome. I've experienced it since forever. When I first went into nonprofit, coming from not being a nonprofit and being in it, being in a field that's new to me, coming to even as executive director, first role as an executive director, walking into a boardroom with board members that I have to report to, a staff that I now manage, in a field, a child welfare field, which is not my experience, right? So in all of those moments, I've struggled with, do I know enough? Do I have enough? Am I enough? And for me, I've never been able to convince myself I am enough. So I just have to pretend I am enough, right? And just convince myself when I walk into the room that I am. And I will say and going back to kind of that example I gave of an intern just coming into my office. So someone that has imposter syndrome or someone that is like, doesn't think they're entitled to my time, that can be very scary. And so just forcing yourself to do that and remembering what the worst thing that can happen is someone says no, or something goes wrong, and that's only just a fraction of time, and then it's over and you get to try again. And so it's just continuing to try again, putting yourself out there. And I think the only people that get to be really successful in life, other than those that are the opposite, who are incompetent and believe they're amazing, but we won't go into those people. But the rest of us who are really just trying to do our best, like, as long as you keep putting yourself and you keep trying, you are going to live up to that. You're going to do it, right? And what has helped for me, I've never been good at tooting my own horn ever. Like, I'm not typically someone that historically has been able to talk about my successes. Fundraising helps you with that because you learn to have to talk about successes all the time to convince people to give. But now I've leaned into it. I'm like, no, this organization has grown under my leadership. I do have something to offer. And so I have to remind myself of those things, of that growth, and advocate. And I think especially as women, we tend to under advocate. And I would imagine people of color even more. That you are often, the stories that are often told to you or what about yourself, you are you don't believe well of yourself, or you don't believe the person on the other side of the table is gonna see your strengths or what you have to offer, and you just have to kind of lean into it and expect it. But I also think when you're interviewing for jobs, you can ask those questions too. Like, you can see the kind of people you're working for by asking those different kinds of questions. Like, we're an organization that we have an equitable pay scale. You can't negotiate your pay when you come in. And the reason why I did that is because in the field of social work, it's predominantly African American women, and with much higher degrees than I have, making $20,000 less than I make. And so I found that when I paid people for their years of experience, the education that they have, it it made it so that, like, you don't, that you're getting paid for what you have to offer, not for your ability to argue. And so I think you can, if you're not someone that is at the place that you can advocate for yourself, find an organization that you don't have to advocate for yourself, that they already see the value that you have to offer. But you're going to have to learn to advocate for yourself too. So no matter where you go or what you do. So I don't know if I answered that incredibly well, but that's something that, I'm 43 now and I'm still struggling with it. So I don't know if that ever goes away. But I'm sorry for any guys on here, but women, once you see enough men advocating for themselves, when you can do their job 3 times as good as them, you'll get much better at advocating for yourself.
I like that.
And I think all the time about Dr. Howells. I don't know if you, in your class we did, I think about this one lesson all the time where we did a reading about, oh gosh, now that I'm talking about it, it's gonna, about 30 Rock. Do you remember that, about Tina Fey and 30 Rock? Do you remember that? It was a long time ago, but I think about it all the time, and like, there's like this really great feminist reading that like just was fantastic. And I think about every single time. So anyway, I don't know if you.
I'm gonna have to go track that down because I can't remember it off the top of my head. I'll have to go track it down.
I think it was just one class, but it always just stayed with me. And
Oh, that's so great.
talking about, I can't remember exactly what the takeaway was, but it always has stayed with me. So.
I love that. Thank you so much. And yeah, everything you're saying today is just resonating. Thank you.
No, absolutely. This is so good. I just put in the chat some of the gems you've shared, but there's actually a question from a student who's having difficulty with their AV. So I wanted to read it for you. This is from Ashton Jones. They're asking, what does your day-to-day life look like when it comes to working at a nonprofit / writing grants? I'm a stickler for scheduling and punctuality, so I'm curious as to what your typical schedule looks like each day.
Well, I have to hire people like you because I'm not a stickler for scheduling and punctuality. Well, no, a little bit for punctuality, I shouldn't say, but so my day varies. I mean, as a leader of an organization, it's much different than when I was a director of development, because here it can vary by who just decides to sit in my office and tell me what is on fire currently. So that it changes often. But I'll just stick to grant writing because that seems to be what you're a little more interested in. With grant writing, they're always on a cycle, right? Most grants are annual. Some can be, the really good ones can be multi-year, but most are annual grants. And so I always say that you really are never comfortable in a nonprofit until you've been there for at least a year, because you need to get through an entire grant cycle to make sure you know what the reporting is, what you're doing. Like when the next grant is coming up, my staff says that I'm always writing a grant. I maybe just use that as a way to be like, leave me alone, I'm writing a grant. But I think I am almost always writing a grant. But there are seasons that are heavier for grant writing. So based on like usually funding cycles. So federal government is usually a 10/1 start date. Some state government starts on July 1st. So you have your writing based on those kinds of, and then corporate grants typically can just be spring or fall. So there's certain times a year that are going to be a lot heavier than others. And so when you're writing grants, like especially big grants, federal grants, that's all you're doing for like a week, right? Like you're really focused on that grant and doing that. And then typically every quarter, you are doing a report. So for almost all my grants that are government, you have to do at least a quarter, if not monthly report. So I'm telling them what we've done. I'm having to pull my invoices and show them how we've spent money. And then for the other grants that are like your family foundations or your corporate grants, you may only just tell them once a year what you're doing. But if you want to do well in in keeping grant funding, you have to develop those relationships. So while I may only report to them once a year, and some won't even ask for a report, I'm reaching out to them at least quarterly and just checking in with them, being like, hey, how is it? Sending them an email being like, I just wanted to share this story with you, or and just especially with family foundations, because those are just really wealthy people that put a foundation together and they're going to give money based on what they feel, right? And so making sure you connect with those people. So I think that's a part of grant writing that a lot of people don't talk about, which is that relationship development, is that you have to continue to get to know your funders and making sure you're matching with them. And I think to the part where I was saying that I don't think grant writing is that special of a thing, I think it is more relational than anything else, because if you know your funder and you know what they're interested in, it's really easy to write that grant because you're like, I know what they want. I'm going to write this. They're so interested in youth aging out of foster care. That's what I'm going to write about. But if I don't know my funder and I'm just reading what they write on their webpage of saying all these things, then I'm just guessing. It's a shot in the dark. And so, so when you're not grant writing, you're developing those relationships. I'm trying to think in development and then telling stories. I mean, even if you only do development and you don't do the communications piece, you're still telling stories constantly in your grants, in trying to get individuals to donate to your organization, in telling individuals about what you did, that kind of thing.
Very nice. Love that advice. I mean, and you're reiterating some of the things that you've said before, like being proactive, reaching out to them, saying, hey, you're not asking for anything, but just FYI, here's what we're doing. So that's a really good way to sort of drive home being proactive, being connecting with other people, tooting your own horn. There's another question in the chat from Amy Phelps. First of all, congratulations, Amy. Amy says, I graduate in December and am going directly into a full-time paralegal position. Congratulations twice. Is there a way to work in grant writing on a part-time basis as a volunteer or as a freelancer? And do you or other organizations ever work with freelance writers?
Most organizations in Savannah, I shouldn't say most, I know most of the ones that I interact with most have freelance grant writers. I'm one of the few that I know that still do almost all my grant writing myself. And I even I do contract someone to do the grant research and some of the initial development for me because I'm just running out of capacity. So absolutely, that is a thing. It is a thing we don't have enough in our community of. I know people, like I see emails all the time. Hey, does anybody have a recommendation for a grant writer? So you absolutely should. If you're interested in that, you can do that. You do need to get some grants under your belt to convince some people to hire you. So I would recommend volunteering with an organization. And I mean, if you find an executive director that says, no, I'm not going to let you help me write grants, let me know, because that person's crazy. I don't think it would be hard for you to say, hey, I enjoy writing. I mean, even as a paralegal, so you're already obviously doing a lot of writing. I mean, if you're in a paralegal position in Savannah, reach out to me. If you're in Statesboro, reach out to me and I'll connect you with the CASA there, because you doing that kind of doing that, like that intersection of law and grant writing would be very interesting for the work that we all do. And you could cut your teeth with our organization or the one in Statesboro, or even if any county, just if there's CASAs everywhere. So I'm happy to connect you and get you in a position that you can talk to them and just again, you just got to get a few wins, and then you could say, I'm this wonderful grant writer and I won this. And then, they'll hire you for cheap. And then the more you do, then you can start charging a lot. And you can make a lot of money as a grant writer.
Excellent. All right. Looks like we'll have time for one, maybe two more questions. And there's one in the chat. This is from Ashton. How much time does it typically take to write a grant? It seems like it could be a lengthy and or overwhelming process, yet I'm still extremely interested.
It very much varies. Like federal grant can take you weeks to write. There could be upwards of 60 pages that you're turning in. A corporate grant can take you 30 minutes to write. So they really vary. When you're in an organization for long enough, you have enough of a database like of your grants that you're doing a lot of cutting and pasting. So when I took over this organization, they had like two primary funders. And so there was just those grants. And so I had to do a lot of writing to get a pretty good database. But now when interns come and work with me, they can look and find so much information. But I still do really enjoy the occasional brand new grant that's writing for we just started a brand new program, and it was just so much fun to write about a new program and start from scratch. So yeah, so it really, again, varies. But grant writers that are hired are typically doing your much more substantial grants. Like a nonprofit's probably not going to ask you to write a corporate grant because they could do that in their sleep.
Excellent. I do want to respect people's time. We do keep these at an hour, and we are coming up on 4 minutes. And so I know Kate, Amy in the chat said that she is going to email you immediately after the session. So would you mind putting your email in the chat for us? And I've already placed in the chat some of the gems for today, but for our recorded audience, I just want you, if you're listening in, Kate wants you to toot your own horn, to be proactive, be professional. And what that means is operate with empathy, be on time, and speak from a place of understanding. It also means leaning into rejection, developing thick skin, being receptive to constructive criticism, being curious, adaptable, and flexible and bold. And also, and perhaps most importantly, is advocating for yourself. So Kate, would you like to close us out with any words before we send everyone off?
Just that I'm a resource. There was a lot of really extraordinary people that gave me a chance and introduced me to the right people. So I'm happy to do that for anyone at any time. So please, my email address is there, but a lot of the English professors at least at the Armstrong campus have my email too. So reach out to any of them, and I'm happy to connect you, or just go to coffee or lunch, or invite you to one of our fundraisers. We have some really fun ones that you can just come hang out and see what it's like behind the scenes, because I didn't even get into event fundraising. That's a whole nother thing. So yeah, so just reach out.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. Well, with that, everyone give Kate a round of applause to thank her for being here today.
Thanks for having me. It's fun.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Nonprofit people out of this.
I hope so too. I hope so too. So thank you all so much.
Thank y'all.